political parties was formed in 2019. It is also in the race for the country's leadership against Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's party, the Ethiopian Prosperity Party. It says it understands the Electoral Board's explanation that it is not ready for elections to be held in May.
It's up to the election board and the government to decide on the date of the election, because the election for us is there's a lot at stake, and we believe it should be different from whatever kind of election we have so far, because as we know, we didn't have free and democratic elections so far in this country, and this is going to be the beginning, and it's very important that we get it right.
But some opposition parties have expressed concern that suggested dates fall during the rainy season. Some citizens speculate the new dates will favor the incumbent party. Ezema says this will not be the case.
To be honest, I don't see how it's going to favor one party and stand against another party. The time, whatever backlashes it's going to have it for all the parties in the country. They are arguing somehow it's going to be a transportation. There is going to be a transportation problem. The same applies true for Prosperity Party. Somehow they're not going to travel by air they are going to travel like we do. All the other parties do. So I don't see that.
Befekadu Hailu, a rights and democracy activist, says the delay must be managed well to allow fair opportunities for all participating parties.
This schedule makes Prosperity Party, the ruling party, in a more privileged situation, because they are already in power, they have the structure, and there is power imbalance between opposition groups combined and the ruling party. So that power imbalance can be maybe narrowed only if more time is given for opposition groups to reorganize themselves. As most of us know, the opposition groups barely started, their preparation, organization, and structural adjustments only recently.
Elections are being planned at a challenging time for Ethiopia's democracy. Ethnicity conflict has led to internal conflict in parts of the country. The government says close to 300,000 people remain internally displaced. The International Crisis Group says peace is vital for free and fair elections.
So far, what's happened is that with this opening of the political space that we have seen, it has allowed space for all sorts of different groups to come back into Ethiopia, or groups that were in Ethiopia and are now newly emboldened, and they are all claiming or pursuing their different interests at the same time, and this is leading to considerable instability.
The Electoral Board will confirm the new date for elections on 1st February. Coletta Njohi, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Let's go to Uganda now, where scores are still feared missing after a 3-story building collapsed in the eastern town of Jinja. 4 people have been confirmed dead, while 8 others are receiving treatment. CGTN's Isabel Nakiria reports.
Rescue teams from the Uganda police and army are still searching for more survivors from the collapsed building in Jinja town. It's not clear how many people could be trapped, but several people are still feared missing. Out of the 37 people believed to have been on duty at the time the building collapsed, 16 have been accounted for. Police are also hunting for the site engineer of the structure. An investigation has also begun to find out what could have caused the building to come down. The 3-story structure caved in during the evening hours just as workers were about to end their shift. Building collapses are common in Uganda, where developers are often accused of bypassing regulations. Reports also indicate construction is often carried out hurriedly, with a lack of supervision from a qualified engineer on site. Isabel Nakiria, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
Iranian President Hassan Rouhani says there is now no limit to the country's enrichment of uranium. Iran withdrew from the 2015 nuclear agreement following the U.S. assassination of one of its top generals. As tensions escalated in the Middle East, chances of reviving that deal became slim. But so far, Iran has only modestly increased its nuclear activity. In recent months, enrichment of uranium was boosted to 4.5%. The limit set by the previous agreement was 3.67%, but it is still far from the 20% enrichment Iran was engaged in before the deal. Uranium must be enriched to 90% to be used in a nuclear weapon.
Today, as I stand here in front of you, we have no limits about nuclear energy, absolutely none. Our daily enrichment is more than before we signed the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, also known as 2015 nuclear deal. If constant watchfulness is not exercised, we are only one bullet away from war. Be aware of this. Can you or someone in this world tell me if the US President Donald Trump will do tomorrow is predictable? Not someone from here. Can someone in America say that? And not in America. Can even one of his advisors inside the White House itself say that he is predictable? Well, now an unpredictable person has come and has created problems not just for us, but for everyone, for his own people, for the Mexicans, for its region, for the Pacific, for Europe, everywhere.
Well, the EU's top diplomat, Josep Borrell, says he held frank and direct talks with Iran's Foreign Minister, Mohammad Javad Zarif, in New Delhi on Thursday. The EU says it pressed Iran to preserve the increasingly fragile nuclear deal. This comes after Britain, France and Germany formally accused Iran of breaking the 2015 nuclear arms control agreement. Iran accused European governments on Thursday of sacrificing the deal after US President Donald Trump threatened them with higher car export tariffs. Now, the Egyptian parliament has approved a presidential request to renew the state of emergency. A 3-month extension will begin on the 27th of January. It is the 11th extension since 2017, and while that may sound like an extreme situation, our correspondent Adel Al-Mahraoui says that many Egyptians have become used to it.
Since 1914, martial or emergency law have been introduced in Egypt. Until the mid-70s, it has always been attributed to war, from the First and Second World Wars to the tripartite aggression in 1958 and the wars against the Israeli occupation from 67 to 73. With President Mubarak in power in 1981, the emergency law has been part of Egyptian lives for 30 consecutive years.
The 2014 constitution referendum changed the concept of emergency in Egypt. Prior to it, it was a law that gets renewed annually. It introduced the king of law, which affect all state institutions. Everything fell under the emergency law. Now it's an emergency state that only extends for 3 months and can only be extended with 2/3 of the parliament approval, if necessary.
President El-Sisi faces the most limiting legal restrictions any Egyptian president had to impose the state of emergency. However, he can have it for long times as long as the parliament stands next to him. Despite an outcry from some rights groups on the restrictions it could impose, many Egyptians say they are not bothered with it.
The only negatives are wrongful arrests of a few citizens. We hope the Ministry of Interior improves on that. Otherwise, we totally support the state of emergency. It is necessary and has no effect on our daily lives. As long as we don't violate the law, we don't feel anything.
I am happy with this state of emergency. We are in an inflamed region. We're surrounded in countries that often suffer from terrorist attacks. So this state of emergency protects us from that threat.
It is not favorable to extend the emergency state and apply it all the time. But sometimes it's necessary. The Middle East is all conflicts and disputes. So right now, I believe it's wise to apply it correctly.
The emergency state enables the operation of the Supreme Emergency National Security Court, which verdicts are not subject to an appeal. Only the Egyptian president can approve, decrease, or pardon its verdicts.
Renewing the state of emergency in Egypt has always sparked controversy. In the past, that used to happen every year or every couple of years. With a new constitution in effect, this controversy emerges every 3 months. But many Egyptians have made their peace with it. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
You're watching Africa Live. Time now for a short break. Coming up, the World Food Programme says 45 million people in southern Africa face acute food shortages. And Uganda announces remarkable progress in the fight against malaria.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. You've got to get out, go there, and you'll find them. In the bazaars of Casablanca, among the crowds in Cairo,
Who come to visit Cairo, the ancient capital of Egypt.
along the waters of the Nile, along the sands of the Sahara. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. No one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
"45 million people in the Southern African Development Community are in great need of food assistance. According to the World Food Programme, the food insecurity has been increased by repeated drought, widespread flooding and economic difficulties. The WFP reports that the situation is likely to get worse. Southern Africa faces severe drought while reeling from natural disasters like Cyclone Idai that affected countries such as Mozambique, Zimbabwe and Malawi last year. Zimbabwe, on the other hand, is battling with its economy, marked by shortages, including food and fuel scarcity. The country has blamed its crises on sanctions imposed by Western countries. The WFP hopes to assist 8.3 million people in 8 of the worst affected countries. Funding also remains a top priority, with only $205 million out of the $489 million required to provide this assistance. Now, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, more than 15 million people are in critical need of food assistance. The WFP points out that the DRC is the second largest hunger crisis in the world after Yemen. CGTN's Christoph Chamringa reports on how the ongoing conflict in the east of the country has triggered food insecurity.
Armed conflict in the east of the DRC has displaced thousands of people. Many of them have been forced to abandon their farms to seek refuge in safer areas. And that means there just isn't enough food to feed them all. The World Food Programme says the DRC is among the African countries in dire need of food assistance in the first half of 2020.
According to the latest figures that we have collected, there are 15.6 million people that are considered severely food insecure in the country. But it doesn't give the whole picture, because in fact we have another 27 million people that have some sort of malnutrition that will still require some assistance.
International agencies are providing the DRC government with emergency funding to deal with the food crisis, but that's stretching the World Food Programme's resources.
But the needs are enormous, and so there's always need for additional resources. Now, just to reach the end of June, we will need an additional 145 million just to finance the ongoing projects.
Last year, the DRC government launched a military operation to end the armed conflict in the east of the country. President Felix Tshisekedi also announced the establishment of agribusiness zones across the country to help end food insecurity. But some Congolese citizens doubt whether things will change for the better.
We have a lot of rivers and arable land in our country. Most of our people are farmers, but they only produce on a small scale. Our government is only interested in a more lucrative mining sector.
The DRC's troubles have also been worsened by flooding in parts of the country. The DRC has 80 million hectares of arable land, but only 10% of it is currently being cultivated, according to the Food and Agriculture Organization. Conflict here has gone on for more than 2 decades, meaning that without an end to the violence, it's hard to see how to bring an end to the hunger. Chris Sochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
Meanwhile, the United Nations is also warning that more than 7 million South Sudanese face severe food shortages in 2020. The UN says the situation has been worsened by the start of the dry season in January. CGTN's Patrick Oyet reports.
5 years of civil war has denied farmers in South Sudan the chance to cultivate their land. A degree of peace is now returning to the country. The United Nations mission in South Sudan says 500,000 people who were previously displaced have now returned to their own homes and started farming. But flooding, which displaced close to 1 million people in November last year, meant the little crops farmers had planted were washed away. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization says that now the only viable source of food in the country is livestock.
There is no country in Africa that has a high livestock number like South Sudan. With a population of about 12, even say 13 million, as has been said, all these animals are there. And the South Sudanese have got the experience to raise the animals. What we need is now to move forward into the value chain and see how we can increase and double this amount so that it can produce and it can lead to the GDP of this country.
South Sudan continues to rely on food imports from neighboring countries such as Uganda, but for many here, imported food is too expensive.
A new rainy season isn't expected until mid-April. That's the time farmers would start cultivation, but the crops would take at least 3 months to be ready for harvest. Aid groups say many South Sudanese people will have to depend on food aid for at least 6 more months.
Flooding in South Sudan late last year also spread diseases among animals.
The ministry still stands challenged with outbreaks of certain diseases in the country, especially those relating to environmental and climatic changes. Currently, we are battling outbreaks of waterborne animal diseases in most parts of our country.
The United Nations says that as long as the civil war continues in South Sudan, the food security situation will only get worse. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
And some good news coming out of Uganda. The country's health ministry says malaria cases across the country have fallen. The ministry's new survey shows a drop of over more than 100,000 cases in the last 5 months of 2019. Hilary Ayesiga tells us more.
Uganda has the highest rate of malaria death in Africa and the highest transmission rates in the world. But there is hope for these patients. The number of deaths from malaria dropped from 80 per week 6 months ago to 40 per week at the end of December. Malaria experts say progress has been remarkable.
We moved malaria considerably. From 2009 with a prevalence of 42%. By 2014, we came to 19%. By now, we are at 9%. Okay? That is over 3-fold reduction of prevalence.
Over 290,000 malaria cases were registered in Uganda in July last year, but only 199,000 were reported in December. Health workers attribute the reduction to increased awareness and better use of preventive methods.
Government has been very strong in malaria prevention. Everyone almost has a mosquito net.
But the disease continues to spread.
In a place like Apache, a person is bitten by 1,564 infected mosquitoes every year. This is the highest infective rate you can record anywhere in the world, and it is in Uganda.
The government is now encouraging people to spray insecticides indoors and to seek treatment on time. The fight against malaria is still a big challenge for health workers in Uganda. But as they expand preventive programs, it is hoped that the spread of the disease could be reduced even further. Hilary Ayesiga, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
China and Morocco are about to celebrate their first year of travel and culture in February to enhance relations between the two countries. Events will be held, including a Sino-Moroccan forum on culture and tourism, and Morocco will hold many cultural events in China, including exhibitions of Moroccan tea culture and music.
We believe that we have to further enhance cultural exchange through tourism so that people from both countries will understand each other better, and Chinese and Moroccan people will be able to communicate between each other.
This initiative allows us to get closer and closer. Our goal has always been to show our heritage and culture in China, and also to receive the Chinese cultural works in order to show them to Moroccans.
And let's now go to Uche for your latest business news.
Thanks, Lindy. And coming up on Africa Live Biz. French oil giant Total plans to drill its deepest offshore well in Angola. And Telkom South Africa's share price up by 8% after announcing thousands of job cuts.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Now, French oil major Total plans to drill the world's deepest offshore well in Angola in waters more than 2 miles deep as the African country works to reverse years of declining output. Now, the well will be 228 meters deeper than Total's Raya 1 well in Uruguay, which was completed in 2016. Production in Angola has slumped by a third in the past decade, following years of underinvestment in new projects. Total has positioned itself to be the country's top foreign operator as it mulls billions of dollars of future spending there. Now, Total has also hired the Maersk Voyager rig for its drilling campaign in southern Africa, which comprises 2 wells in Angola and 1 in Namibia. Meanwhile, South Africa's biggest fixed-line operator, Telkom, saw its share price rise as much as 8% on Thursday. That's after news that it may cut up to a fifth of its workforce as it battles a declining income from its fixed-line services. Now, Telkom informed unions that the possible job cuts, which will take place across departments, will particularly affect its OpenServe unit. The unit supplies wholesale fiber broadband access. Now, Telkom attributes the cuts to declining fixed-line use as well as a constrained operating environment. As of the end of September, Telkom had about 15,000 employees. During its half year to end September, the company's operating revenue had grown 4.7% to $1.5 billion. And staying with telecom matters, Ethio Telecom has reported a 32% rise in its first half revenue to $693 million. Now, the government plans to offer a minority stake in the state telecom's monopoly that has attracted interest from leading operators, including Kenya's Safaricom. Ethio Telecom's telephone subscribers rose by 10.9% to 44 million in the half year, which ended on 31st of December. The firm has also increased users for its mobile data services on both the 3G and 2G platforms. Ethiopia's telecoms industry is considered the big prize because of its huge protected market, which serves a population of around 100 million people. The country plans to award 2 telecoms licenses to multinational mobile companies by April this year. Let's move on now to aviation matters. Egypt Air has resumed flights to Baghdad after 3 days of suspension. Egypt's flag carrier had temporarily halted flights to the city following tensions between the US and Iran over the killing of an Iranian general. Here's Yasser Hakim with the details.
The decision by Egypt Air to cancel flights to Baghdad was based on security concerns, and it proved worthwhile. 2 days later, a Ukrainian passenger jet had been mistakenly hit by an Iranian rocket, and all on board were killed.
The airlines take precautionary measures to safeguard their planes and passengers. The procedures require that the airline notifies the target cities and international authorities of any cancellations, in this case Iraq, followed by informing the passengers ahead of time.
Several other airlines such as Lufthansa and Air France have also temporarily suspended flights to Baghdad. This came after the assassination of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani in Baghdad. The travel bans are meant to keep the passengers safe, but at the same time they have had a strong economic impact on the airlines in the region. Libya, Yemen and Syria are just some of the countries in the region where airlines had to suspend flights on several occasions. Flight cancellations cause a setback in revenue for the fiercely competitive international airlines.
These are major losses for the industry. Cancelling just 1 or 2 flights can cost the company $200,000. To cut out losses, some airlines provide an option for its clients. It offers to take the passengers to a nearby city or country, which is safer to land in as an alternative.
In spite of the economic impact, flight cancellations for security reasons will remain a priority. Financial losses from a cancelled route are minimal compared to a plane crash and loss of lives. Yas Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
And shifting focus now, according to Chinese Vice Premier Liu He, the deal signed by China and the US on agricultural products won't hurt the interests of third parties. Under the deal, Chinese companies are expected to buy about $40 billion worth of agricultural products from the US annually over the next 2 years. But the Premier also says that will be based on market conditions as well as the demand of China's domestic market.
There are 2 important conditions in our negotiations. The first one is not hurting the third parties, and the second one is sticking to the principles of the World Trade Organization. China's imports are actually based on the market principle and the rule of supply and demand. Enterprises import according to consumers' demand and the supply-demand relationship of the market. Imports will be scrupulously checked by domestic consumers, so generally we believe that it will not hurt the interest of third parties. In fact, as you may know, China has become a very important component of the global market. Imports from other countries are not conducted willfully. Those products must be competitive and attractive, especially in the face of housewives. If the products are not attractive for housewives in price and quality, it only means that the enterprise is not good enough.
Now, some U.S. economists and officials believe the signing of that trade deal could help stimulate the global economy by eliminating a major uncertainty.
I think the uncertainty will decrease and will have a return to some improvement in capital investment, so a moderate recovery in industrial production in the United States, probably some significant improvement in countries that are oriented towards capital goods exports, like, for example, Germany, Japan, South Korea.
And I think that will be a plus for business sentiment. It will be a plus for global growth as we look into 2020, as we take away one of the more significant concerns and risks.
We both win by seeing the trade war end. There are no winners by seeing the trade war continue. Both for the Chinese people and the people of America. We believe there's a great possibility that this can come to a conclusion and we can go back to being great trade partners with each other.
It gives us a platform on which we can help to build a stronger, more sustainable U.S.-China bilateral relationship in economics and business, but also beyond.
Now, of course, that newly signed trade deal is also attracting attention from South Africa. Anthony Black, a professor of economics at the University of Cape Town, says the agreement will be conducive to the development of the world economy.
If you have a situation where big, powerful countries start calling the shots, I don't think that's to the benefit of smaller countries or to the global economy generally. So I think that we do need multilateralism, and we do need big countries, including China and the US, to play an important role. Multilateralism actually becomes more important because you need institutions like the WTO and other multilateral institutions to really modify or to kind of negotiate these situations.
Well, that's all for now on Africa Live Biz, but coming up later on Global Business Africa, we'll be delving further into South African Airways as the airline is looking for more funding yet again. Of course, all that coming up top of the hour. For now, back to you, Lindy.
Thanks, Richard. Well, let's take a short break. Here's what's still ahead on Africa Live. Coming up, we tell you how global warming is making life harder for Tunisian sea sponge fishermen.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Qanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
For some women, the wedding gown is one of the most important dresses she'll ever wear. There's a lot of emotion that goes into it, and historically, brides wore white gowns with the color linked to purity. But in recent years, more women are abandoning the traditional white gown for something more colorful and unique. CGTN's China-Morocco explores this trend through the eyes of one designer.
I think it's the one thing that most clearly represents the wedding day. It's the most dramatic piece, probably the single item that you spend so much money on. So it will, and you'll also get so many photos from that day of you in your wedding dress. So it's one of those things that will be a reminder. So it's really, really important that you get that dress right. But on top of that, it's also a representation of who you are. This is the one dress that you put so much time and effort and money into selecting. So it's important that you stay true to yourself, and it's a representation of who you are as a person and I guess what you stand for. So this is a blush pink and gold wedding gown. The top part of it is sheer. You can actually see part of like her skin through some of the gaps here. So it's lace which has been overlaid on a sheer fabric, and then there's some beadwork which has also been added. Then the bottom part is a more like solid blush color. At the bottom, it's been made with a very full tulle fabric as well, and then there's a satin underlayer. We found that brides are leaning towards different styles like this, which are something in between wedding gowns and evening gowns. The reason for that is, one, this is a dress you could probably just trim at the bottom and use again, so you get more use out of the money that you're spending. And then two, people are more interested in making gowns which are individual, which are personal, which represent them. If, for example, she's a more creative, more flamboyant bride, she might opt for a colored gown, not necessarily in white and not necessarily in blush, but there's so many other colors we are seeing coming into fashion right now. So colors like blue, champagne, gold, silver, of course blush. Yeah, and it's becoming a trend. Also, what we're finding is people are getting married older as well. So that whole tradition thing is not as strong anymore. It's no longer about trying to show people that how pure you are. And I think brides are also thinking that because I'm paying for my gown, I want to get the exact gown that I want. I don't really want to fall into a certain category or to be boxed in with the kind of gown that I'm wearing. So for that reason, we are seeing a lot more creative designs, a lot more out there colors for our wedding gowns. There's been a lot on the catwalks, a lot of celebrity weddings where people are not necessarily wearing white. On top of that, the older we are, the less apologetic we are about what we are doing. Older brides seem to have a clearer idea of what they want, and they also don't take too much advice from different people. Like, they're very clear, they have good money to spend as well, so they're getting the dress that they love.
And that's it. China-Morocco, CGTN.
To Tunisia now, where fishermen have been driven into deeper waters in order to harvest sea sponges living on the coral reef. This is because the sea sponge is being forced into deeper waters itself by a disease that locals believe is linked to pollution and global warming. The natural sea sponges are biodegradable and commonly used in body care. CGTN's Adnan Chouachi explains why the high-risk trade has continued for decades.
Many boats are at rest at the port of the southern fishing town of Zerzis in Tunisia. Fishermen say the quantity of sea sponge has decreased by 70%. Only 4 years ago, 40 boats used to harvest sea sponge in this region. Now only 14 are still in the business.
This is due to the catastrophe of the mysterious blight which killed the crop. Fishermen can no longer work on the Tunisian coast. We harvest sea sponge in international waters, 30 miles off the Italian coast, where it's legal. Sea sponge is rare on our side of the Mediterranean.
Kamel learned sea sponge harvesting from his ancestors. Now he exports his harvest to Europe and Asia. The fisherman says the price of some sponge species can reach $200. However, rising sea temperature is causing damage to his activity.
The boat leaves the port of Zerzis and crosses 280 miles to harvest the elephant ear sponge. We spend 2 days at large to reach the right location. We plunge between 50 and 60 meters because the sponge lives in cold water. Global warming affects sea temperatures and decimates the crop. It's a risky job.
A scientific team from the National Institute of Marine Sciences and Technologies in the capital city Tunis has been trying to answer the questions of fishermen. A study has recently been conducted in Zerzis, as well as in the islands of Jerba and Qarqna. Karim Ben Mustafa is one of the leading sea sponge experts in the Mediterranean basin. He says recent findings have moved the research team a step closer to unraveling the mysteries of this powerful disease and the sponge mass mortalities.
This is mainly due to the absence of thermocline, which is normally present in seawater. It's a temperature barrier which protects the sea sponges by keeping a constant temperature. Warming water temperatures modify the metabolism and physiology of sponge communities. It makes them fragile to viruses and fungi, while their immunity is weak.
The sea sponge harvesting season lasts 10 months. It's a seasonal sea activity from June until the end of April. But fishermen can only work for 3 to 5 months per season. They hope that sponge mass mortalities will stop in order to preserve their ancestral marine activity. Adnan Chouachi, CGTN, Tunis.
In spite of a lower and upper limb disability, a young Ghanaian is beating the odds by fighting to be independent. We go to Conakry now to discover how Issa Sai does it all.
Issa Sai lives in this slum of Conakry. Disabled from birth, she lives with her husband and has her own household chores. Making her husband happy is her daily dose of motivation.
When I get up in the morning, I sweep the yard, clean and wash my dishes. Because of my disability, my husband is the one who goes to the market. When he comes back, I automatically start cooking. I have to start very early so that my husband eats lunch because I cannot work quickly like non-disabled people.
Issa holds a degree in pharmacy and is the proud mother of a little girl. Despite her courage, she still faces the difficulties of moving every day, and her challenges have increased since the birth of a child.
My ambition is to have a car. I used to ride alone on a motorcycle. Now with a baby, I can't. I ask NGOs to help me just to make it easier for me to take care of my baby. I can't put my baby on my back and go too far. It's not going to tire me, but rather the child. I can't take her and stop at the taxi stop. So I ask people of goodwill to help me, not for me, but mainly for my daughter. Right now my child is sick, but it is my husband who takes her to the hospital. I have to stay at home.
Working steadily to beat the odds, Issa Sai has earned the respect and admiration of her family.
Until she reached a certain age, we did everything for her. One day, when she started crawling, we realized she could eat on her own. She dipped her stumps into the food and picked up bits, and then put them in her mouth. Her father was surprised to see her do it on her own. From then, we understood she could be independent.
I first saw her on TV and I got in touch with her. And then by the grace of God, we got married. My parents had no problem with our union, but my friends and some of her family members did discourage me. But I never listened to people. Her courage really attracted me to her.
Even with her degree, Issa is still struggling to find a job. Her ultimate goal remains to settle in a career that will allow her to take care of her family. Daniela Pearson, CGTN.
And coming up in your sports news, up next. Kenyan legend Stephen Tokolo leaves his post as Uganda's national cricket team head coach.
How would you create your legend?